So the Jake Paul Hasim Rahman Jr. fight is off. Both fighters have taken to social media to blast each other and blame the other one for the fight not taking place. As far as I can tell, it is the fault of Hasim Rahman Jr. because he signed up for a fight at 200 pounds, but he then made the other side aware that he wouldn't be able to make this 200-pound limit, and that instead he wanted to come in at 215, which is way, way above the limit. Now, he's saying that Jake Paul is a so-and-so for not still going through the fight, even though it's 215. He said he had no issues sparring, as in Jake Paul had no issues sparring him when he was 230, I think he said. But now all of a sudden he cares about weight. So, he's trying to put pressure on Jake Paul to still go ahead with it. But ultimately, the contracted weight is what stands. Those are the terms. That's what you signed up for. You can't start moving the goalposts a few weeks before the fight and saying, actually, no, I don't want to make 200 pounds. Let's call it 205 or 215. No, it don't work that way, bro. Jake Paul clearly isn't as naturally big as Hasim Rahman Jr. And therefore, I can't blame him for wanting to bring the guy down in weight a little bit, particularly when he's given up so much in terms of experience. These are not two guys with a similar level of experience here. Hasim Rahman Jr. had plenty of amateur fights. He's also, to my knowledge, had more professional fights than Jake Paul. If it was a situation where both guys have a similar level of experience or Jake Paul has more experience, then I'd be less sympathetic with Jake Paul trying to bring him down in weight. But that's not the case. Jake Paul, way less experienced than Hasim Rahman Jr., way smaller. So bringing him down in weight, I think it's a reasonable request for a late replacement opponent. Because, of course, he did originally want to fight Tommy Fury, and they're a lot more similar in size. So that's my take on it. It's disappointing because I thought it was kind of an intriguing matchup. Jake Paul versus Hasim Rahman Jr. Also, the New York State Athletic Commission took issue with the check weight because Hasim Rahman Jr., during the check weights, was way above where he should have been. He was nowhere near on schedule to get down to 200 pounds. So I guess there was a red flag from that, and one thing led to another, and now the fight is canceled. It's off. Will Jake Paul be able to find a really last-minute replacement opponent to save the show, or is the show just going to be off altogether? I know he's had the likes of Chris Eubank Jr. saying he'll step in and what have you. I'd be surprised if that happened, but if Jake Paul is serious, and I'm not saying that he is serious, it could just all be cap and trolling and him creating hype, but if he's actually serious about one day fighting for world titles and fighting the likes of Canelo and so on, then a middleweight like Eubank Jr. shouldn't be beyond him if he's serious. Now, I'm not saying that he would beat Eubank Jr. at all, but all I'm saying is, if he thinks he's going to go as far as he says, then why not take on a Eubank Jr.? Eubank Jr. is not as good as Canelo. So you guys make of that what you will, whether Jake Paul will find another replacement opponent to save the show, or whether the show's actually off. In fact, I'm sure some of you are going to be bombarded in the comments as we speak, telling me, of course the show's off. How could you not know it's off? I don't follow Jake Paul that closely, people. Yeah, I've watched, I think, all of his pro fights, but I don't follow him on a day-to-day basis in terms of what he's saying on social media and all this kind of thing. Dana White, incidentally, believes that the real reason, quote unquote, that the fight isn't happening is because of poor ticket sales. Is that possible? Hey, I guess it's possible, but at the same time, this weight issue seems to be a perfectly understandable reason for the fight to fall through. If a guy's contracted to come in at 200 pounds and he's saying he wants to be 216, that's a big problem. Now, Hasim Rahman said that he can pay any fines or whatever the case may be, but it's not just about the fines. When Jake Paul picked this opponent, there were people who were genuinely concerned because of the massive size difference. It's not just about sticking to the contract because it's in the contract for the sake of the agreement, the honoring the agreement. No, it's about the reason that those stipulations were in the contract in the first place. Because boxing is a dangerous sport. There are weight divisions for a reason. When you've got a very inexperienced guy like Jake Paul going up against a much more experienced guy who also happens to be significantly bigger, you got to take the less experienced, smaller fighter's health into account. It is what it is. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.